It's Marvel Studios is casting the lead for a film that could either launch a brand new franchise or become the studio's most embarrassing flop. A wise-cracking, dancing, morally questionable space outlaw named Peter Quill. Star-Lord. The movie, Guardians of the Galaxy. A film about a talking raccoon and a walking tree. Even Marvel insiders were nervous. This wasn't Iron Man. This wasn't Captain America. This was a cosmic gamble with characters most Americans had never heard of. And the man they were about to bet everything on. He wasn't a leading man. He was the chubby funny guy from a TV sitcom. He had a gut. He had no action credentials. And more than a few Hollywood executives looked at his name on the shortlist and said, "Are you serious?" But here's what nobody expected. That decision, that one casting call, would turn a former homeless man living out of a van in Maui into one of the highest paid actors on the planet. This is the story of Chris Pratt, and it's wilder than any Marvel movie. By 2012, Chris Pratt had been in Hollywood for over a decade. He had a steady gig, a wife, a house. By any normal standard, he'd made it. He played Andy Dwyer on Parks and Recreation, a lovable, dim-witted man-child who ate too much and thought too little. Audiences loved Andy. Critics praised the show. But nobody looked at Chris Pratt and thought, leading man. He had gained nearly 60 pounds for the role. He was soft, round, and deliberately goofy. Casting directors saw him and thought, supporting player, comic relief, background funny guy. When his name came up for action roles, the conversation was short. Studios wanted Channing Tatum. They wanted Chris Hemsworth. They wanted men who looked like they were carved from marble. Not a guy whose most recent diet consisted of, by his own admission, whatever was in craft services. And the real problem wasn't just his weight. It was perception. Hollywood had already decided what Chris Pratt was. And once Hollywood decides what you are, changing that is almost impossible. Almost. To understand how Chris Pratt got here, you have to go back to the beginning. June 21, 1979, Virginia, Minnesota. A small mining town in the Iron Range. The kind of place where people work hard, dream small, and stay put. Chris was the youngest of 3 kids. His father, Daniel Pratt, worked construction. His mother, Kathleen, worked at a supermarket. They weren't wealthy. They weren't struggling. They were a working-class American family doing exactly what working-class American families do. Chris was athletic, charismatic, and, by his own account, not exactly focused on his future. He wrestled in high school. He was funny. He was popular. But after graduation, he enrolled at community college in Washington State and almost immediately stopped going to class. And this is where the story takes a turn nobody saw coming. Chris Pratt, future Marvel superhero, dropped out of school and moved to Maui, Hawaii. He was 19 years old. He had no plan, no savings, no real skills beyond charm and a willingness to work. He waited tables. He sold coupons door to door. He worked at a Bubba Gump Shrimp restaurant on the beach. And for a stretch of time that he's spoken about in interviews, he was homeless, living out of a van or a tent on the island of Maui. Most people would call that rock bottom. Chris Pratt called it the best time of his life. "I was broke and I was happy," he later said. But life was about to change in the most random way imaginable. It was 2000. Chris was 21 years old, waiting tables at Bubba Gump Shrimp in Maui. A woman sat down in his section. Her name was Rae Dawn Chong, an actress and filmmaker. She watched this tall, funny, effortlessly charming young man work the room, and had a single thought. This guy should be in movies. She offered him a role in her short film. He said yes. Not because he had a master plan. Not because he'd always dreamed of Hollywood. But because, why not? What did he have to lose? That small film led to nothing immediately, but it lit something in Chris Pratt that hadn't been there before. He moved to Los Angeles with almost nothing. He slept in his car. He auditioned for anything and everything. And here's what nobody talks about. The years before the breakthrough were brutal. Los Angeles does something cruel to ambitious people. It gives them just enough hope to keep going, while quietly grinding them down. For Chris Pratt, the early 2000s were a decade of almost. He landed small roles. A few episodes here, a guest spot there. He appeared in Everwood. He had a recurring role in the OC small parts. Forgettable characters. The kind of work that pays the rent, but doesn't change your life. He auditioned for bigger roles and didn't get them. He watched other actors, guys he knew, guys he'd started with, land the parts he wanted. And this is where the real danger set in. Not failure, not poverty, but something worse, comfortable mediocrity. When he landed the role of Andy Dwyer on Parks and Recreation in 2009, it felt like stability. The show was good. The character was fun. The paycheck was real. But to get the role fully, and to commit to it, Chris Pratt did something that would later seem like career suicide. He gained weight. Deliberately. Andy Dwyer was supposed to be a slubby, lovable goofball. So Chris ate. And ate. At his heaviest during the show, he was carrying around 300 pounds. Funny on screen. Devastating for his prospects anywhere else. His agents weren't calling with action scripts. Directors weren't imagining him in a harness. By 2012, Chris Pratt was 33 years old, a decade into his Hollywood career. And while he was beloved on a critically acclaimed sitcom, the ceiling above him felt very, very low. And this is where everything almost collapsed, not in a dramatic, public way, but quietly, internally. He told interviewers later that he had accepted, somewhere in the back of his mind, that this was it. Andy Dwyer. Parks and Rec. Maybe a few movies in the future where he played the sidekick or the comic relief. The leading man dream. He'd quietly let it go. But then, a director named James Gunn made a phone call. James Gunn was preparing to direct Guardians of the Galaxy for Marvel Studios. The casting process was enormous. The studio had screen-tested some of the biggest names in Hollywood for the role of Peter Quill. Names like Joseph Gordon, Levitt, Joel Edgerton, Eddie Redmayne, Zachary Levi, and Lee Pace. Chris Pratt was not on the original shortlist. His manager pushed for an audition. Marvel agreed, almost out of courtesy. Chris walked in, did the audition, and something happened in that room that people who were there still talk about. He became Peter Quill, not an actor playing a character. The character walking and talking in a human body. The charm, the humor, the unexpected vulnerability underneath the cocky exterior. The way he could make you laugh and then, in the same breath, break your heart. James Gunn called Marvel executives immediately after. It's him. It has to be him. But here's what nobody expected. Before filming started, Marvel told Chris directly, "You need to transform your body. You have 6 months. 6 months to go from 300 pounds to a physical specimen worthy of a Marvel leading man." Most people would have been terrified. Chris Pratt treated it like a mission. He worked with trainer Duffy Gaver and nutritionist Phil Goglia. He trained for 4 hours a day. He ran, he lifted, he swam. He ate precisely calibrated meals. He lost 60 pounds. He gained muscle. He went from Andy Dwyer to star Lord in 6 months. When he appeared on screen in Guardians of the Galaxy in 2014, the audience reaction was instantaneous. Who is this guy? Guardians of the Galaxy opened in August 2014. It made $94 million in its opening weekend. It went on to gross $773 million worldwide. Critics called it one of Marvel's best films. Audiences fell in love with the entire team, but especially with Star-Lord. And just like that, Chris Pratt was a movie star, not a supporting player. Not the funny fat guy. A full-throated marquee-level Hollywood movie star. The offers came flooding in. In 2015, he starred in Jurassic World, which became one of the highest-grossing films in history, pulling in $1.67 billion worldwide back-to-back billion-dollar franchises. In 12 months, he returned for Guardians of the Galaxy Vol. 2 in 2017. Then Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, 2 of the biggest films ever made. He voiced Emmett in the Lego Movie, adding yet another blockbuster to his extraordinary run. In 2023, he voiced Mario in the Super Mario Bros. Movie, which grossed over $1.3 billion globally, making it one of the highest-grossing animated films of all time. From a homeless kid in a van in Maui, to voicing one of the most iconic video game characters in history. But what made Chris Pratt's rise different from the typical Hollywood success story wasn't just the box office numbers. It was the authenticity. He never pretended to be something he wasn't. In interviews, he talked about living in his car, about being broke, about gaining 60 pounds for a role and then grinding himself back into shape. He was a man the audience could look at and think, that guy is one of us. In an industry full of carefully manufactured images. That was revolutionary. Think about what Chris Pratt's story actually represents. A kid from a Minnesota mining town. A dropout. A homeless man in Maui serving shrimp to tourists. A stranger in a restaurant looked at him and saw something. He said yes when it was easier to say no. He moved to a city that breaks most people. He worked for a decade in the margins, doing small roles, collecting rejections, watching others succeed. He gained 60 pounds for a TV role, and in doing so, nearly buried himself alive under the weight of someone else's perception of who he was. And then, at 33 years old, when most actors have already written the second chapter of their story, he walked into an audition room and refused to be small. Marvel didn't just discover a movie star that day. They discovered what happens when a man who has lost almost everything learns to want it again. Chris Pratt didn't become Star-Lord in that audition room. He became Star-Lord in that van in Maui, in that Bubba Gump restaurant, in every rejection that didn't break him, in every pound he gained and every pound he lost. The role didn't make him. He made himself, long before anyone was watching. And that is the story Hollywood never tells.